everyone, Jennifer here. I'm just popping into the very beginning again to ask you to please rate and review this show on any podcast platform that allows it, especially Apple Podcasts, because that really helps the show find new listeners. Okay, here we go.
COVID came in like a storm. It showed up one day. My whole entire family got COVID December 2020. I'm still in some ways trying to figure out how it happened. But as you know, and probably, so many other people who've experienced getting COVID, you don't sometimes even know where you got it from, who you got it from, what situation, interaction, whatever. My husband became sick first, then I became sick. Soon my children became ill, but my husband's symptoms were the worst.
There was the last normal day, the last day that things were the way they were before they weren't anymore.
We kind of all rushed out of the house and said a quick goodbye. And, little did I know that would be the last time I hugged my mom.
He yells and tells me he's getting ready to go. He said, "I'm okay. Just stay here. I'll be home in a few hours." We tell him bye and he leaves. That was the last time we ever saw him.
It's like the minute that helicopter hit the air, it just hit me what I was watching, because I knew he wasn't coming home and he knew he wasn't coming home.
For me, I took it more personally because I'm a nurse practitioner and why can't I save him? I can help all these other people, and why can't I save him?
Telling us that it was time, we needed to make a decision, we need to go ahead and just take him off the ventilator. And I was like, how do we know?
One thing I like to tell people is that if you lose somebody to COVID, your need to talk about the person you lost will outlast other people's desire to hear about it.
We make sure that our family members and loved ones' memories lived on. That's really important to me, is that people don't forget. I don't want to forget any of it.
So talk about them. Talk about them till people are sick of hearing about them, because as long as you're still talking about them, they're never far away.
And the last thing that my mom said is, she said, when you get to heaven, we will look for each other.
Hello everyone, you're listening to For Those We Lost. I'm your host, Jennifer Sullivan. Thank you for being here. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com, or go to the website forthosewelostpodcast.com and click on the contact button, and you can reach me that way as well. Also, if you'd like to help support the show, you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. The link is in the show notes. All right, let's get started with this episode. Today I'll be talking to Melanese in Maryland. Melanese lost her husband, Charles Thomas Jr., on February 28th, 2021. He was admitted to the hospital with COVID in December 2020 and was there for about a week, and then he was released and came home. Melanese talks about his health struggles afterward and how her husband tried to push through, but he struggled with long COVID symptoms and collapsed and died in their home. Melanese has suffered a lot of significant losses in her life, but even with all that, she found that the death of her husband was the rawest, most emotional grief journey she has ever undertaken. For context, we recorded this episode on July 15th, 2022. Melanese is active in advocacy with COVID Survivors for Change, a COVID widows group on Facebook. She mentions the In America Flags installation, and she has become a grief coach and has her own grief support group. All those links are in the show notes below, along with her social media contacts and a link to her website. She also mentions the book she wrote called What the Grief. Information on that will also be in the show notes. And with that, I'd like to welcome Melanese to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And today we're talking about your husband.
Yes, ma'am. We are talking about my husband, Charles Thomas Jr.
And he passed away in February 2021.
He did.
And you're located in Georgia, yes?
No, I actually am located right outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland.
All right. Yes, I seem to remember that now. You're located in Maryland. I think I just saw the East Coast thing, and for whatever reason, I had Georgia on my mind. So.
Sure, no problem at all. Completely understand.
All right. So where I start almost every episode is in March of 2020. And what I'd like you to do is take a few minutes and talk about how you and your family first heard about COVID and how it changed what was going on in your life.
Sure. So actually, I'll take it back just a little bit before March 2020, because my birthday is February 22nd. So in February of 2020, my husband and I actually went on a cruise, a Carnival cruise for my birthday. So we had heard about COVID. So I remember when we were doing the onboarding process, they asked us if we had gone, did any international traveling, did we have any of these symptoms? And we kind of briefly had heard about it, like on the news. Of course, we just kind of check marked. No one at that time was doing temperature checks, anything like that. And we got on the cruise and we got off and we had a great time. We had fun, got back home and didn't even realize on the horizon just a few short weeks later that literally seemed like the bottom would drop out of everyone's world. With me living outside of Washington, D.C., it's really hard for me to kind of describe that time because I don't know. For people who live here in the kind of Washington, D.C. area, we have not only local issues, but the national issues are like literally in our back door. So it gives you a different perspective on national things because it's like the capital I can get to in 35 minutes. It's just like, it's kind of different. To think about national issues when you live so closely, to Washington, D.C. So we started hearing word through the news. Then it became apparent that we more than likely would have to go into lockdown, shut down for my company. My company did kind of like a call all hands on meeting saying this is what will probably happen. We started getting information from my children's school about possibly shutting down. And then my daughter was away at college, although she was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is not that far from us. Yeah. We still had to make arrangements to go pick her up. And then eventually they shut down totally. So she had to pack up her whole entire room and leave. So it was a bit chaotic and we didn't really know what to do. We were told on one side not to worry, and then on one side take precautions. So I kind of felt like we were told at the very beginning, oh, it's sort of like the flu, and if you get it, you feel sick, but you won't die, and now you think about the million people who have perished because of COVID, and then you were like, that was, it was so wrong. It was nothing like the flu, it was so much worse. So so that was our time that was how we heard about COVID and how it kind of affected us at that particular time.
Yeah. And what was your husband doing? Did he start working from home too?
Unfortunately, he couldn't. My husband was a concrete truck driver, so he was laying concrete for foundations of buildings being built in the Washington D.C. area, Northern Virginia area, and even uh, parts of Maryland. So that's a job you can't do from home. You have to be
Yeah.
literally in a truck driving, to and fro to all of these construction sites. So that was my other concern. I was like, we were all at home, so we knew more than likely we wouldn't come in contact with it. But my husband was out and about on a daily basis, not only amongst his coworkers, although driving a truck is kind of, by yourself, you're solitary. However, you have to get out and you have to interact with the other construction employees, foremen, supervisors, other drivers, things like that. So I was like, I was really worried. It really worried me, that he was making contact with so many different people on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see how that is an essential job because building needs to happen. And after a certain amount of time, even if they did send him home for a couple of weeks, they would have to figure out how to bring people back to work. Did they set up any kind of protocols for testing once testing was more routine, or temperature checks or anything like that?
Yeah, unfortunately, nope. I think it was pretty much a daily anybody feel sick kind of thing. it
Oh,
was
wow.
it wasn't really any like a whole COVID protocol, and I never saw that. It might have been on his end and he just never let me know that. But from all conversations and discussions, I think all the employers or employees were kind of winging it. They didn't really know how to even do this themselves, because at that particular time too, at the very early stages of it, we were getting so much misinformation. We were getting, because no one really knew. It was still so early in the pandemic that no one really knew. Do we wear a mask? Do we not wear a mask? Do we, use hand sanitizer? Do we not use hand sanitizer? Do we stay 6 feet away or 3 feet away? It was just like all of
Hmm.
these questions back and forth, and then it just got to be so political. And then, like I said, especially being here right outside the Washington D.C. area, it was really, really political. And so it just became really an uncertain time. I can say that. Anxious. Everyone was kind of anxious, trying to figure out, so where do we go from here? What do we do? And will we ever return back to normal again?
Yeah. Yeah. And how many kids did you have at your home at that time? All six of them?
No, my older kids are adults, so they were, at their own places. So the only remaining were the minors at the time. So I had, at the time, I think he was in fourth grade. Then I had my son who was about 16 at the time. And then my daughter who was away at college. And I think she was like 20 at the time.
Okay.
So it was just the two minor children, and then the one that was away, my daughter who was away at college, and that came back home once her college closed.
And did the older children live in the same area? So I guess my bigger question is, how did it affect your family, like your group and your interaction that way?
Oh, absolutely. One son, who's our oldest son, is actually my stepson, but I call him my bonus son. I said
Mm,
I got bonus children. My bonus son, he does live in the area. So it did affect us. He didn't come over very often, because we didn't know who he had interacted with. It
yeah.
was kind of hard. He was and still is a teacher. So his days were full, trying to teach. He also has a daughter, so he was trying to still parent, raise a child. So where we would gather on a weekly basis, we probably didn't see each other for weeks at a time, so and then even then it was really precautious. He would wear a mask, we would wear masks, he wouldn't come close. We kind of say hi, bye, that kind of thing. We just wanted to check up on, everyone, and he wanted to check on us, but that was it. And so it was, yeah, it was unfortunately, it did kind of disrupt our family dynamics. My other bonus daughter at the time lived in Arizona. So that was so far away. And, with airlines shutting down and all that other stuff, it was really no way for her to get home. So we did stay in more contact with her, just, via phone, FaceTime and things like that. But yeah, it did kind of disrupt the family dynamics.
Yeah. Yeah, in Arizona, I've said it before, I still feel like that was kind of the wild, wild west early in
Right.
COVID.
Right.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us about how COVID came into your lives?
Sure. COVID came in like a storm. It showed up one day. My whole entire family got COVID, December 2020. I'm still in some ways trying to figure out how it happened. But as you know, and probably, so many other people who've experienced getting COVID, you don't sometimes even know where you got it from, who
Mhm.
you got it from, what situation, interaction, whatever. Um, my husband became sick first, then I became sick. Soon my children became ill, but my husband's symptoms were the worst. I tried to convince him to go to the hospital, but he would not go because, as we later learned, COVID disguises itself, and he started feeling better, and then eventually it got worse, and he would feel better and then he would get worse again. So especially that first 2 or 3 strands of COVID, um, that's what it was doing. And I tried so hard to convince him, to go to the hospital, but all on the news we had heard, you go to the hospital, you would not come home. So in my husband's mind, I believe he felt like if I go to the hospital, I'm not coming back home. However, his oxygen levels kept dropping. And I kept saying, I really think you need to go to the hospital. I really think you need to go to the hospital. Finally, I convinced him to go. Um, because I had been diagnosed with COVID also, all I could do is literally take him to the emergency room, drop him off, make sure he got checked in, and they told me to leave. I could not go in the room with him. So that walk from dropping my husband off to the emergency room back to my car, I literally sat in my car for 10 minutes and cried because I wanted to be there for my husband. Although I was sick, I still wanted to be there for my husband. I wanted to hold his hand. He doesn't like needles. He doesn't like hospitals, those kind of things. So I wanted to be there for him. And it just hurt my heart that I could not be there for him. Um, Finally, a doctor did call. I kept in contact with him. He had a cell phone. So I would call him. I'm like, were you seen by the doctor? Who's your doctor? Who should I call? That was the only way that I could find out anything, was literally directly through him. My husband's, wasn't a medical professional. So he would tell me things and I was like, that just doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, we're not medical professionals. So,
Right.
the doctors tell us something, we might hear something else. So I was like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. So he was just like, well, here's the information, call the doctor. So they finally, I'm sure they were running around crazy themselves. Finally, a doctor did call back, or it might have been even a nurse who called me back. He was diagnosed with pneumonia in both lungs. His oxygen levels were very, very low. He was actually hours away from being placed on a ventilator because that's how low his oxygen levels got. But God, for whatever reason, God allowed it to happen where his oxygen levels started rising. Precautionary, they kept him and he stayed in the hospital for about 7 to 8 days. And then he was released before Christmas. We had a wonderful Christmas, wonderful New Year's. He was a bit tired. He was still breathing very heavily to me. I know the pneumonia did tremendous damage to both lungs. And he was using an inhaler now. He had never used one before. He had gotten some medication. He had all of these visits set up with various doctors to check him, with our primary care physician, with other specialists. But, at that particular time, no one was doing in-person visits. So they were all virtual visits and things like that. So we had a few, but the to me, the most concerning ones regarding his lungs were not for, we couldn't get anything for almost a month or month and a half or something like that. And to me, I believe in that time frame, he started kind of deteriorating a little bit more. Asking him, I was like, are you sure you don't want to go back to urgent care, back to the hospital? And he was so adamant. He was like, no, I'm fine. He was so adamant that he was trying to return back to work, which he did in January of 2021. And I was just like, do you not understand? Just a month ago, you were in ICU in a hospital, laying minutes, hours away from being placed on a ventilator. I said, I understand our financial situation, everything else. It'll work out. I said, something's going to happen. It's going to work out. You don't have to rush back to work. I was working still remotely from home at the time. And I said, we'll make this work. We'll make this work. What I didn't say before is my husband and I started a food truck business before the pandemic. We were trying to get it up and running when the pandemic happened. And my husband was like, well, during the pandemic, all the restaurants were closing down. We felt like we could offer a service to our community. We kind of live in a food desert in Maryland. And so we started setting up only on Sundays. We would offer Sunday dinners. And people would come out. It was based off of soul food recipes that were taught to me by my mother and my grandmother, and things I picked up along the way. Also, my husband was responsible for the grilling. He did the fried fish. He did the ribs. He did the chicken. He did all of that stuff. So all of that ceased, once we all got COVID in December of 2020. But he was so adamant on trying to get the business back up and running. And he tried weather. Of course, DC weather during January and February is very unpredictable. It could be, really, really cold, rainy, snow, ice, all kind of things. And it kept delaying our opening. So we tried to serve actually on February 28th. That day it just rained from morning to night. It was like a soaking rain. We cooked, but we knew we couldn't set up and really have customers. So we just called a few family members and friends to come by the house, get something to eat. We cleaned up from, serving dinners. And I went to bed. I was tired. And then my 16-year-old at the time, he informed me, he was shaking me and he was like, Mom, something's wrong. And I got up. My husband was on all fours, well, on his hands and knees, and he was rocking on our bedroom floor like he was trying to get himself up, like get himself to a standing position. And I kept saying, I call my husband Poppy. I said, Poppy, what's wrong? What's wrong? He could never speak. He never said anything to me. He was just kind of groaning. And I tried to kind of help him up. My husband was a big man. He was 300 plus pounds. So I couldn't physically help him get up. But I kept saying, Poppy, what's wrong? What's wrong? Tell me what's wrong. Tell me what's wrong. And at that point, I just stopped asking and I just called 911 and I asked, for the 911 operator to send paramedics and fire and rescue. She did, and at that particular point, once I finally got on the phone with a 911 operator, he collapsed face down, and at that point stopped breathing. So she had us roll him over. We performed CPR until the fire and rescue got there, and they also performed CPR and life-saving measures for probably another 35 minutes or so until they finally said there was nothing else they could do. We really don't know what particularly happened. I feel that the damage from my husband's illness from COVID, all the lung damage, everything else that happened, was just too much for him to come back from and for him to recover from.
Yeah. Well, I have had pneumonia a couple times, and it's hard. I I got it a few years ago, and I remember just they wanted to keep me in the hospital, and I was like, "No, I wanna go home." And in retrospect, once I got home, I wish I had stayed at the
Yeah.
hospital. It was
Right.
hard. It was hard to get up even off the couch to go to the bathroom and walk down the hall, and, oh, yeah. So, I'm sorry, it just, um I keep thinking about you and your family in the house with him, and then all of the commotion that must have been going on and how much that must have been for you.
Um, how can I put it? Someone's asked me, how did you even function? And I told them that I was not functioning. I was numb, in disbelief, uh, like I don't even know how to even describe it. Like I was a wife that morning, and by that evening, I was a widow. Like, how do you even, your brain can't even make sense of the difference or the change or the trajectory of your life at that particular moment. Um, I think my whole body probably began to shut down just so I could still function. Because I think when we have trauma that is just that, when we experience something that traumatic, I believe our body does what it can to not overwhelm us. And I believe I just got into shutdown mode where I just went within. I kind of felt like The Walking Dead. I literally kind of felt like I was walking, but I wasn't fully in my body. I felt like someone else had taken over. I was responding, I was answering questions, but it didn't feel like me answering the question. It actually felt like a stranger answering the question, and but still functioning. Um, what I can say is the foundation of my life has always been my faith. I am a follower of Jesus Christ. So I believe that firm foundation of faith is what carried me. And that's probably what, they talk about the story of the footprints in the sand. And
Mhm.
sometimes you see the two footprints, and then in front of you, you only see one. And I believe that during that one footprint, that was Jesus actually literally carrying me through each minute, each second, each hour, each day. Um, and it's days where I see the two footprints, and I'm like, thank you, for standing right next to me, guiding and leading me. And it's some days I see that one, and I do know that he is definitely carrying me. It wouldn't be any other reason for me to be able to tell my story, to be able to continue living without that foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. And had you made any plans for, funeral plans? Had you talked about anything like that? Did you have a funeral for him?
Um, we did not talk about funeral. I think that's a thing. I think, and I think that's one of the reasons why I continually tell his story, which is now becoming my story and my
Mhm.
family's story, is because I think, especially in Western culture, we have this whole taboo of we don't speak of death, we don't talk about death, we don't talk about dying. Um, Although we all know that eventually we all have to die, that
Yes.
that is the life in which we live. we all will die, but we don't talk about it. Like, no, we can't say anything about it. That's taboo. So in our marriage, we never talked about it. Now, I would jokingly, I've have now since been more open until in telling my children that I'm not joking anymore. Like, I tell them, if I should pass, I want to be cremated. And this is what I want it to look like, and this is what I want my service. I have gone through this whole thing with them now because I don't want it to ever be of in question. Like, what did mom want? Does she want this? What does she want? So we didn't talk. So I literally had to just kind of go based off of what I think my husband would want, and then base it off of meeting the needs of the family left behind and his friends left behind. So we did hold a celebration of life service. We used strict COVID protocol. By that time, the first rounds of COVID vaccinations had been administered. So my mother and my sister from Florida were felt safe enough to travel to Maryland to help me. They came within probably 2 to 3 days after my husband passed. We did require everyone to wear a mask. We had a visitation that was held before the service, and that allowed any and everybody to come pay their respects. And then we did only invite guests and immediate family members, which was minimized, to stay for the celebration of life service. At that time, hand sanitizer became my best friend that day. So many people wanted to love and hug on me, and we were still in the early stages to me of COVID, but I knew I needed to feel their hugs. I needed to feel the love, their strength. I believe that I gained so much strength by someone hugging me and literally carrying me through that day. But yes, we did have a celebration of life ceremony.
Sounds beautiful. Yeah, the hugs and the grieving rituals that you go through as a family and a community and a faith group are so important. And I feel like throughout COVID in the last couple of years, there are so many people who didn't get that and get it later and experience that closure, and or not closure, but more of a, I don't know, full circle of coming around and sharing that grief with other people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I feel sorry for those, especially in the early days of COVID, where they were not even having any ceremonies or services. Or if they did, they restricted it to like only 10 people or 15
Yeah.
people. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt the impact my husband had on life had on others. We could never, I mean, we have 10 people, more than 10 people in our immediate family. There was just no way to restrict, that to just 10 people. And I feel so heartbroken for those who did not have the opportunity to, in some ways, you said, bring closure. It kind of brings it to, it makes it final in your head, like this
Yeah.
person is really no longer here. Um, and so it then gives you permission to say, okay, did I dream this? Was this a dream, a nightmare? What is this? And it actually gives you permission to say, no, I didn't dream it. It's not a nightmare. It's just the life in which I live right at this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's been a year since your husband passed away. How was that first year for you, especially around the time when it had been a year since your family got COVID and he went in the hospital and came out of the hospital, and you had hope that life was just going to keep going the way it had been?
Yeah. So for me and my children, it's been a very difficult year. What I did not realize, I call myself a serial griever just because I've had so much death that had happened prior to my husband passing. My father had passed, my two grandmothers, two grandfathers, my a baby brother had passed. I had other family members, cousins, friends, co-workers. So I know grief well, like I know death well, like I had been surrounded. This wasn't I felt like this wasn't new. However, I can say the death of my husband was the rawest, um, probably the most emotional grief journey I have undertaken. Um, Out of all those individuals, and I loved each and every one of those individuals, but it's just something about someone who's in your life in a romantic way on a daily basis. You're raising children, you're building a business together, you're intimate. I mean, it's just something different about that. It For me, I just say it took everything out of me because he was so interwoven into everything that I am. How do I know who I am now without him? So for me, that was probably one of the biggest or most difficult things. The other most difficult part of my grief journey was not only my own journey, but watching my children's grief journey. As a mother, we want to fix everything,
Yeah.
but I can't fix grief. I cannot bring back my husband. I cannot stop their hurting, their pain. So for me, I hurt ever the more because I can't stop their hurting. So that was just devastating to me. What I also didn't realize is that those little anniversarial kind of things, um, when they come around, how much they affect you. Like you said, the anniversary of us getting COVID, and then the holidays. Uh, that first holiday of 2021, that no Thanksgiving, Christmas, it was hard. Very, very hard. That Thanksgiving, especially because my husband loved Thanksgiving. He liked to cook, he liked to eat. So, that was so tremendously hard. Um, and then turn around, my birthday was 6 days before he passed. My birthday is February 22nd. He passed February 28th. So my birthday to me starts the whole cycle of knowing, oh, this is coming up to the anniversary of his passing. So like I didn't even want to celebrate my own birthday. Um, and then probably one of the hardest things that I had to do, actually not maybe a week to 2 weeks um, after he passed, is I had to cancel our anniversary trip. We were supposed to celebrate 10 years in April 20th of 2021. That was going to be our 20th year anniversary. We had planned on going to Jamaica. We were going to do a photo shoot. We had planned on just, loving on each other, spending time together, kind of forgetting this whole pandemic thing, for just a moment.
Yeah.
And then to have to cancel everything that we never even made it to that anniversary. It was heartbreaking for me. I still have the clothes that we were supposed to wear, hanging in my closet, as a reminder that which was will never be.
Yeah, that sort of show me you're grieving without telling me you're grieving.
Right.
Yeah, I have one of my mom's hoodies and her cane hanging over a chair in my bedroom,
Oh,
and they just sit there. But when I look at them, like you look at the clothes in the closet, you remember.
right. Yeah. One of the shirts that my husband wore, and actually he wore on the cruise. We had taken a cruise prior to my birthday cruise, and then he wore it, I think, again on another cruise because I think I have pictures of it. I found it, in going through his things, and now it is hanging on my driver's side seat in my car. So every time I drive, I feel like he is wrapping his arms around me. So I learned that when you find ways of honoring your loved ones, makes the process just a little more easier. Like you feel like they're still a part of your daily life. So I feel like every time I drive my car now, he's there. He's, hugging me as I'm driving to take the kids to school, go to grocery shopping, buy gas, whatever the case may be. And so he is a part of my daily life.
Yeah. And I'd like to talk about your transition after he passed and how you became you're a grief counselor, right?
A grief coach.
A grief coach.
Mhm.
Yeah. And how that happened.
Sure. So, probably I would say, let's see. So my husband passed in February of 2021. Probably not about a month to maybe a few weeks after he passed, I got a call from a former church member of mine who said her daughter's husband just passed, and he just passed of COVID, and she has COVID also. Um, she said, I'm a mother, but I don't know what to say. I've never been a widow. She said, can you talk to her? I'm looking around like, I don't know what to say to her either. I'm still trying to figure this whole widow grief thing out myself.
Yeah.
I was still, kind of overwhelmed by it all, but I did feel the call to help her. Called her, and I just gave her space and grace to just let it out. And she knew she was safe with me because I also had lost my husband. And although I felt like I had done nothing, once I got off, I felt so much, um, I just felt an overwhelming sense of I actually helped someone. Even in the midst of what I was going through, I assisted someone, and I felt like I need to do this. Like, I need to take what's been one of the most painful things that ever happened to me in my life and use it. Um, in the word, it says beauty for ashes.
Mhm.
I believe that in the depths of the ashes will come beauty from this. And so I decided, and I started seeking out how to become a grief coach, counselor, whatever the case may be. And I came across a program, and I began doing that program, I believe, in November, um, like October, November timeframe. And I hadn't even reached my first year. But in the process of that, not only was I being taught how to coach others grieving, they also coached me in my grief. So it was probably one of the best things I could have ever done. Not only that, in my whole grief process, I had already began talking to a counselor um, before even my husband had passed. COVID was not good to our whole entire family,
Mhm.
being in close quarters with, your children on a daily basis, trying to help them with school. And it was just too much. And I knew I was in a bad place. So I sought out help. So through my healthcare company, I was able to find a counselor, and we talked, I think at one point, probably like every other week. And I continued talking to her, once my husband passed. She was such a lifesaver because although she did not specialize in grief counseling, just having her there to be a listening ear and a safe space to just talk about my grief, talk about my children, just talk about anything, it really helped me at that particular point. Um, So, so because of all of this help that I was receiving, not only that, I also participated in Grief Share, which is also a program through many different churches in local communities. Um, I'm just a person, whenever I'm going through something, I seek out information. So I'm looking for books. I'm a Google everything. I'm that kind of person. So I was grasping on to any help, any, what you call a lifesaver that anybody could throw out to me. I was trying to hold on to it as tightly as I could. And I do believe just because I was trying to seek it, the word says, seeking ye shall find. I, I believe the help that I needed, I found. And through that, now I want to return that help to other individuals. So I became a certified grief coach in January of this year. I launched my grief support organization. It's called Hope Certain, and I want to provide widows and other grieving women a safe place to feel their grief without judgment. I also want to offer them grace to find their own footing through their grief journey and to help them move from one hope level to another hope level. So that's my goal. I also want to offer businesses and companies workshops on grief and how to best assist their employees. The pandemic did a great job in highlighting companies that take care of their employees well, and then also highlighted those that do not.
Yeah.
We probably saw a lot of those. And then I also want to offer widow and grief retreats around the world. I know for me, just recently, I've been able to get away from it all for a few days, and it was so empowering and life-changing.
Yeah.
So that's a part of my journey. The other part is the advocacy work that I'm now doing. I work with COVID survivors for change. I realized that my silence would not serve anyone. So I've been seeking platforms in which to tell not only my husband's story, but our story of survival and how our lives will never ever be the same again because of this pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that was one of my questions, was whether or not you'd reached out to COVID groups and become a part of COVID groups. And I would imagine in the DC area, there's probably a lot of opportunity to tell your story in Washington, DC.
Um, there's a few. I don't think people want to hear it, actually.
Oh,
To be honest with you, I believe, and you can see it by how many people, as soon as they told everyone to take their mask off, or they didn't have to do it by mandate, they took their mask off. I believe everyone believes they're back to normal. And for me, I was like, what is normal? I will never be normal again. My normal is no longer. I have to create a new life from what was left of, my life. Um, I can say online, Facebook, Instagram, things like that have been a lifesaver, especially through the pandemic. People have galvanized around causes. So I was able to join some COVID groups. I did, like I said, come across COVID Survivors for Change. There was also another group for widows of affected by COVID. So I'm a part of those. I actually found other widow groups on Facebook. So those have been really big lifelines in my life. I needed a place where I could find other people like myself, just to validate that I was not going crazy. I felt in my mind, I was just like, I am going crazy. The thoughts I'm having, these are thoughts of a crazy woman like this. And then I found these communities and realized, no, they're not thoughts of a crazy woman. It's just women who've lost their husbands too,
yeah.
who's lost the loves of their lives, or who's going through probably one of the most traumatic experiences of their lives. So no, you're not crazy. And so I kind of found my village. I found my people, as they say. And it's been so helpful, not only to receive support, but also to in turn give support, because unfortunately, every day I go on Facebook and another individual has joined our widow group, and she literally lost her husband a day or two ago,
Oh,
or a week ago. And it breaks my heart all over again. But I remember being in that place. So now I can offer her hope. I can offer her strength to help her know, yeah, it feels rough. It feels tough. But just keep breathing, 1 second, 1 minute, 1 hour, just keep breathing. That's literally, my advice, just keep breathing.
yeah. Do you find that people in general don't know how to respond to someone who is a recent widow, don't know how to get in touch with that level of grief?
Oh, absolutely. Because first of all, I believe it's probably one of the biggest fears. And actually, it's just one of my Facebook friend voiced it in my inbox. She came to, in my inbox and expressed her deepest sympathies. And she said, this literally is one of my biggest fears, losing my husband or losing my children. So for many women or even men who are married or have a significant other, the loss of that significant other, it's like one of their greatest fears. So it's like having to address your greatest fear. And you know what we do with fear, we don't try to address it. We try to go around it, turn around, act like it's not there,
Mhm.
navigate around it. So in some circles, I know people don't want to hear me speak about my grief. I say it boldly. At this point, I don't even care. I am meant, there's no reason that I believe I was meant to tell this story over and over again and tell my journey. I am very candid. If anybody looks on my Facebook page, I am very candid. I do transparency moments all the time. I will tell them I've been in the middle of DC traffic and lost it. I tell them that, oh, this holiday is rough. I say those things. And then I also say what's the happy moments is I made it another day. I smiled, I had hope, I laughed. When all of this first happened, I never even thought that would be possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other question that I have that comes to mind when you were talking about how people like in DC in that area, people don't want to hear it, is that disheartening to you, or is it more of a motivation to talk about it more?
It is a little bit of both. I'm disheartened that my husband has become a number. He is not a person to anybody, except for those who are in our immediate circles, who lost him. That, when people look at, oh, 1 million people died of COVID, that's just a number to them without realizing there's a face, there's a story behind all those millions of individuals who passed due to COVID. So it's disheartening in that way, but it's also motivating because it just propels me to say, I won't be quiet. Like I said before, my silence serves no one. So I'm going to say it over and over again. You're just going to have to turn me down or turn me off. I don't care. you know I believe my message is meant for someone, and I'm just going to continue to say it until it reaches the ears and the hearts of whoever it's supposed to reach.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I was given the privilege of speaking for the 2022 National Week of Remembrance and Action for COVID Survivors for Change at a national press conference at the U.S. Capitol. There were 2 senators that were there and other individuals who had suffered COVID loss, and we all were able to tell our story and hopefully, draw attention continue to draw attention to the individuals who were lost due to COVID, get Congress to act to pass the Prevent Pandemic Act that calls for action from not only continued health care for those who are suffering long haul COVID. We're not even talking about those who lost individuals from COVID. There's people who are still dealing with the side effects from having COVID, however many, a year or more ago.
Yeah.
To continue to provide them health care, to get my children and others who've lost a parent to COVID, get them either baby bonds or scholarships. And then also, as they're having these congressional hearings, we want a COVID hearings or hearings for COVID. What happened? What went wrong? How can we not ever allow this to happen ever again?
Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't heard that. That's such a good idea to have a wider investigation on what happened, because really how I feel is just every state sort of did their own thing, and there was no real consistency in any of it. And that, I think, would have helped if there was a solid, consistent message for everyone that was community building, instead of just like every person or state or community go do your own thing.
Right. And I believe if it wasn't so steeped in politics,
Hmm.
like if it just was steeped in love, like literally, I love thy neighbor,
Yeah.
as you love yourself. If you don't want to be sick, why would you want your neighbor to be sick? So we always think in terms of Democrat, Republican, Independent. That's irrelevant. Can we speak as a community, as a neighbor? That's the language that we need to speak. And what's best overall for the community, overall for the neighborhood, and and walk in that. But because we are so individualized, it's about me, all day. We have this me song that plays in my head. I think we forget our neighbors. We forget that it's bigger than us. We forget it's bigger than the United States. It's a world, an entire world that we are to be concerned about. And I believe if we thought on that level, so many things we wouldn't have to deal with or have issues with. This wouldn't even have gotten to the point where 1 million people just in the US alone have perished. So
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. And speaking about community, you had talked to me about your kids and how in your community, like, grief is a community thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And I can only speak because I'm African American, so I speak from the African Americans perspective and also from the faith-based perspective. Community is very big in the whole grieving process. It's centered around whatever that grieving family needs. So I know and I got what I have, or based what I do, and as a community, off of what I saw my mother and my grandmother do. So
Yeah.
when someone at our church, when I was a little kid, passed away, my grandmother baked cakes and she made dinners, and they took over food. They bought, waters. They, bought sodas. They bought, all those types of things. I mean, some of the best things that people gave me was cleaning supplies and, paper towels and toilet tissue. Nobody thinks you would need those things. You have more visitors. So of course, you have people coming from out of town. So of course you need more paper towels, you need more cleaning supplies, those kind of things. And then just the whole thing of as faith, we gather to celebrate the life of that individual, and then we break bread. We share in a meal together, and talk about that person. We share stories, we laugh, we joke, we just love on each other, just to give that person and that family strength to go on, because we know once they leave, or once we leave, they're still left with the memories of that person not being there.
Yeah.
So some of the biggest gifts I've ever received during that time was financial. Some of it, like I said, was very simple: cleaning supplies and toilet tissue and paper towels. I mean, people would think that was crazy, but it was. Paper plates. The amount of food that I received was crazy, but it fed my family, and that was one less thing I had to think about. And I'm
Yeah.
so grateful for it. Someone came and helped me clean my house. Someone drove me to pick up my mom and my sister from the airport. Those kind of things. Somebody drove me places because I wasn't in my right mind. I wasn't thinking. I didn't. Although I've gone to the airport a million times, if you had asked me to drive to the airport the week after my husband passed, there was no way we were going to get there. And I could tell you, I promise you, there was no way we are going to get home. I
Yeah.
couldn't remember, how to get there and get home. Some of the other things were just text messages from people. I'm thinking about you. Even after, the celebration of life was over with, days, months, weeks, even a year later, folks are still texting me and saying, Mel, just thinking about you. My kids have come to me, Mom, such and such text me. They just wanted to make sure I was okay. If I needed anything, those things, they've been such a blessing to me. I can't even say how appreciative I am. It's like no amount of words could convey how my true feelings on what has been done for not only myself but my family, my children. I'm so appreciative and grateful.
Yeah, it fills your heart to know that people are thinking about you a year or more later, just wanting to check in and see how you're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have a couple more questions.
Sure.
I was wondering if you went to see the flags when they were in Washington, D.C., and if you added your husband's name.
Actually, I was not in town when the flags were going
Oh.
up. I did though. I wrote in, and so I did have one of the volunteers did do a flag for my husband, and it was posted, and they gave me the location. I was so appreciative. I wasn't in town. It was a women's retreat that I had planned on attending before I knew they were coming to town. So I am so appreciative of whoever that volunteer was that wrote my husband's name for the flags. I so appreciate you for doing that for me, and just commemorating him in that way. I also, during that week of remembrance, was able to speak my husband's name. And also, I was given the name of 99 other additional individuals who had lost their lives to COVID. So not only was I able to speak at the press conference right at the US Capitol, but later on, I was able to speak my husband's name and 99 additional individuals' names who had lost their lives to COVID. So
yeah,
any way that I could help commemorate, anyone who has passed due to COVID, I'm all for it. Flags, speaking their names. I think we're doing a March to Remember in August of 2022 of this year. So it's all of those things just to keep reminding people that the number is not a number. It's actually a person who's attached to so many other individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. A person who had family and friends who love them. It's a million people or more than a million people, but it's also so many more people. And the reason why I love having people on the show and like you are sharing his story as much as you can is because the more that we do that, I think the more people I feel like they have to listen. They have to listen and feel that they're real people that we loved, not just a number.
Correct. And I believe it's easy to minimize a number.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to say, oh, it's just a million people because it's just a number. Yeah. Well, when you continually, as you said, speak their names and you continue to tell their stories, then it reminds them, wait a minute, that's not just a number, that is a person who had influence. They say at a small estimate that one person who passed of COVID, 9 other individuals were affected. I totally disregard that. I believe hundreds were affected by one person who passed of COVID, because not only their immediate family, but their coworkers, their friends, if they were a part of any organizations, any faith groups, that reach. Their legacy is way bigger than 9 individuals.
Yeah.
It is hundreds. And so many, I believe now, if it's a million people or more, at least 100 million people have been affected, by COVID.
Yeah.
In some way, form, or fashion. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know that you could find somebody in hopefully the whole world who hasn't been affected by it. And I say hopefully just because then there's people who will have it in their heart, as
Right.
opposed to just minimizing it, like you said, as a number.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The last question that I ask everybody on the show is, what do you say to people who tell you that COVID isn't real?
Um, for me, how can you even say that to someone who's lost someone to COVID? But how can something that killed over 1 million people be fake, be so be not real? I don't even know how to even grasp or even answer that question. Just because my life has been turned completely, upside down due to COVID. Um, just because we don't see air or oxygen, do we say that's not real? Just because we don't see gases in the air and other things, do we say that's not real? Um, it just boggles my mind. Um, I would want an explanation like, well, if COVID's not real, how did all over 1 million people perish? What did they have that caused them to die? I just don't even, if they could explain that to me, maybe I could kind of wrap my head around it. But there's no way they can explain it. No one has to this day been able to explain it other than being COVID. Um, I, I just don't know how. It's some childhood friends that I know who say that COVID's not real, and all I can say is I can pray for them. I don't know what else other than tell my story that I've been affected deeply by COVID. Um, there's no other way or other answer I could possibly have to even address saying COVID isn't real.
Yeah, I agree. I love what you just said about the gas and the air and all of that. I love it. Because I think like you can't see love,
Right.
but that's real.
Right. You can't see my grief other than the signs. If you never saw me cry, would you say that I was never sad? That's not true. If you never saw me smile or laugh, would you say that, I'm not happy? Yeah, I could absolutely be happy without, smiling. Although a smile is evidence of my happiness too. Yeah, it's just hard for me to wrap my hands around it. And like I said, if you can give me evidence of it, of something else, give me that evidence. But every time I've asked for it, there's nothing that they can say.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Melanese, do you have a website or a way that people can reach you if they would like grief coaching?
Sure. Currently, you can find me on all social media as Melanese Mar Thomas. Also, you can find me at melanesmar.com. And thirdly, I am in the process of writing a book about grief called What the Grief.
Oh,
It's going to be lessons of grief, loss, triumph, and hope. My plan is to release this book in the fall of 2022 or no later than December 2022. So I would love for it to be a resource for anyone who is looking to get a handle or just looking to understand grief in a different way. It's my perspective. It's nothing new. It's probably stuff that's been said before, but it's just the lessons of grief, loss, and triumph and hope that I've learned within this last 15, 16 months.
yeah. Yeah, I think even though, like you said, it may not be anything new, it's your story. It's your story about you and your husband and your family and your grief. And that's meaningful to share with people.
Right. And I hope that in that, in any and everyone could see a piece of themselves in that. and also, identify with it and say, oh, I see that, or I've experienced that, or I've gone through that, or even if they haven't gone through that, oh, this is what my coworker must be going through, or this is maybe what my neighbor is feeling who just lost her husband. And these are some of the ways that maybe I can assist and help her, or him, or whoever, my coworker, my neighbor, whoever the case may be. So just putting it out there. It, like I said, it may not be what everyone has experienced, but I hope that everyone can see just a piece of themselves in it, and just remind ourselves we're all connected. We're all human. We're all collective in this human collective together. And if we just continue to remind ourselves, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
We're not separated from each other. We actually are in this together.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, definitely keep me posted on the book so that I can add it to the show notes and post about it on social media too.
Absolutely. That would be awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you starting this podcast, giving families a voice and allowing the legacy of their loved ones to continue on forever. We do this podcast one day, but someone 20 years from now may be able to listen to it and gather some kind of strength or hope from it. And I wish you continued success.
Oh, thank you, Melanese. I appreciate that. It's what my heart is called to do right now. And I don't know when it will be called to do something else. I don't know if it ever will, but it just fills me up in this way that it's hard to explain. As you know, as a grief coach, you take this intense sadness and grief and channel it. That's the best way I can describe what I'm doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you for today.
No, thank you again. Thank you, like I said, for the opportunity. I so greatly appreciate it, and continue blessings to you.
And to you. And that's the show, everyone. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. This show won't ever have a members area or episodes that you have to pay to listen to, but there are expenses to hosting a podcast, and if you'd like to help, you can support this show at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. The link is in the show notes below. And if you're still listening, and thank you so much if you are, if you like this episode, please share it with your friends, share it on your social media, and once you've done that, please rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts, because that's where most of our new listeners come from. Ratings and reviews are the main way this podcast finds new listeners. So please share the show. Until next time.